Joost Bakker, how you doing?
Mate, I love being here a weekend and I don't want to go home.
Well, it's great to see you, man. How's your stay at the Desa so far here at Potato Head?
Well, we arrived and I just keep bumping into people. So first I had this incredible back of house tour. So when I go to hospitality venues in Australia, usually the chefs freak out and they go, please don't go out the back and see the rubbish that we generate, But here, that was an incredibly inspiring tour to see how you deal with, everything from oyster shells to the styrofoam, that you even allow the staff to bring the styrofoam in and you reward them for bringing it to work. I can't think of any business anywhere on the planet that has that, strategy of over 1,000 people bringing their rubbish back to be dealt with properly, So, and then, I walked into Brody, who's like possibly one of the world's best sculptors with end-of-life plastic and ocean harvest. He just came back from the Northern Territory and is here for a few days. And it's like, what? So you just keep bumping into these people that are so inspiring and creative, and which, of course, starts a whole bunch of other conversations and ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to have you here. As you know, we are, pushing towards the zero waste philosophy and everything that we do. And, you are, I would say, the zero waste innovator of the world. It's like really, really inspiring what you're doing. And so yeah, just give us a little bit of insight into your work. And so you're florist turned zero waste pioneer turned ecological innovator of the future. Tell us how did that journey begin?
Yeah, I grew up in the Netherlands in a little village outside of Alkmaar, and in the late 70s, early 80s, it was a big thing. The Dutch government, initiated a lot of ideas around sustainability and recycling, and back then, already had like a whole bunch of different bins and parents that were really into the environment and botany. My dad was a flower grower, a bulb grower, and my mum an artist, a creative. So I grew up with like all those three things melted together. And then at the age of 9, we migrated to Melbourne. My dad was kind of distraught with the way that the Netherlands were going. The rivers were polluted, the canals were polluted. There was a lot of acid rain, a lot of industry causing a lot of pollution. So he just wanted to get out, and he had family in Australia. So we basically moved from there to this incredible place called Monbulk, which is in Dandenong Ranges outside of Melbourne. It's got some of the oldest forests in the world, 200-300 million year old rainforest, basically on our doorstep. So as a 9-year-old, that was pretty inspiring to go there. And then I was really pushed to be creative by my teachers in Holland. So I already hooked up with a landscape artist when I was 5, learning how to paint, draw, use all those tools. And then came to Australia and pretty much gave up on all of that, but helped the family business build, igloos and the idea that you could build your own place hadn't occurred. Growing up in Holland, if you needed a house built, you had to go and get a builder and get someone else to do it. Whereas when we moved to Australia, you just do it yourself, So that really inspired me. And suddenly, by the time I was 17, I was building this massive shed just out of stuff that we had. My brother said, yeah, go and build. We needed a tractor shed. It was like 30 by 30 meters, this huge thing. And it still stands today. And just started questioning how we build and why do we generate so much rubbish. And then at the age of 20, about 30 years ago this month, I started as an artist in Melbourne, moved to the city, moved to South Melbourne, started creating art out of waste and juxtaposing waste. So I'd find blue, the strapping that goes around boxes, and then create like a vase or suspend something from a ceiling and then use agapanth that sort of got a similar identical blue, So I always mixed nature with waste. And I don't think anyone really, waste wasn't a thing in the early 90s, people weren't really, and the art, I never even thought about it as art at the time. I just wanted to create like an awareness of waste, and that it's only waste because we perceive it that way. And then in the late 90s, like a friend of mine who had a gallery and was showing some serious artists said, look, I want to have an exhibition with your work. And I was like, what, just me? He goes, yeah, you need to have a solo exhibition. And so I had my first one then, and then that became this annual thing, and I just pushed that idea further and further. 2001, Jenny and I bought a farm, and I wanted to grow organically all my own flowers and plants and move away from that whole modern chemical production of flower production. And I was already, seasonally doing flowers, but then went to architects to design a straw and sustainable house. And the way that I wanted to do it was in a really modern context. I didn't want to have long eaves, and everyone said, oh, if you build with straw, you've got to have 3 meter, the walls can't get wet. And I'm thinking, that's fuck, like that, I want modern, high ceiling, sharp lines. So a guy that I was hanging out with at the time, Nonda Katsoulides, who designed some amazing buildings in Melbourne, like the world's tallest apartment building, Eureka. He designed that, and he kind of said, "Yo, just do it yourself." And him saying that to me gave me the confidence to go, right, I just designed my own house, built my own house. And then I was just going to go back to art and just going back to what I was doing. And then a friend of mine shot it, and it got on the cover of Vogue and Interior Design magazine and magazines in America and Europe, and it just kind of exploded from there. Suddenly I'm being asked to design buildings, and I'm not an architect. But I realized really quickly that architects don't think holistically. You know, they choose a material because it might be practical, it might be beautiful, or it might, you know, serve that purpose, but they don't think about the end of life, or they don't think about how it's made or where it's from, you know, the impact that it had. Yeah, so suddenly I'm designing, you know, buildings and houses, and then I was still really frustrated that hospitality was generating a lot of waste. So the City of Melbourne, I had proposed like a zero waste building to a client, Macquarie Bank, in 2006, and it actually because of them, but I couldn't get it approved. And then Professor Rob Adams, who was the head planner, said, "Why don't you build it at Federation Square?" So in 2008, we built the first greenhouse, and it showed all the structural elements. There was no skin on the outside of the building. I wanted people to see how it was made. It was made from light gauge steel and straw, and had like 100 ton of soil on the roof. All the soil was made from waste, and you know, we developed all these systems. And I did another one in 2009, which was more permanent, which actually won Best Restaurant in Australia, and then my chef won Best Chef in Australia. And it kind of just sent that whole idea of zero waste and sustainable hospitality. It just made it kind of center place. And then we did one in Sydney, opposite the Opera House there, and one in Melbourne. And each time I just evolved the idea. And ultimately in 2011, I was actually quite frustrated and thinking, why hasn't, you know, the hospitality industry adopted more of these ideas? You know, the coffee and in paint tins and you know, all these things. We don't need coffee bags. We don't need, like, if you're using huge amounts of things and you're getting it from local producers, we don't need olive oil bottles. You know, all these things can be in reusable containers. And I came to the conclusion that because our greenhouse was just too crazy, there was like fucking thousands of plants on the roof. There was a party going on the roof. We had music blaring, and it was like I think it was too stimulating for the senses. It's a lot like here, really. I'm sure that 99% of people leave only really understanding a tenth of what you guys do here, because it's so deep. You know, every single element goes so deep. So I really think similar thing was going on. So I decided to open a restaurant, a cafe that looked like an ordinary cafe. And that was Silo. That was 2012. And this brilliant young chef, Douglas McMaster, was on my back. "I want to work for you. So I gave him the head chef role there. And it kind of just, we won Best Cafe in Melbourne, Best Coffee, and we got really busy, and it just probably did more. That little 40 square meter cafe did more than all of the hospitality venues I'd done before that were much bigger and more grand. And I think it was just because, oh wow, means that we can do it. And yeah, so, you know, we had no glass, we had no bin, no cardboard, no, like we work with winemakers, wine on tap. We work with a dairy company to have like an amazing stainless steel system for cream. We had a system. We got this incredible oats and rice and wheat directly from farms, and then we would post back a bag with all the bags back to the farm. And sometimes you could see that we'd received the same bag because it'd been stitched 4 or 5 times, you know. So it was down to that granular detail, you know, and it was so much fun. Yeah. So then Doug decided I made him leave. Actually, his dad was not well. I said, "You got to go home. Your dad's not well." And so he went back to the UK and did amazing things there, doing Silo in the UK, which I still think is mind-blowing. And I decided that Silo, I had achieved what I wanted to achieve. So I then came up with a new concept called Brothel, inspired by one of my heroes, Dr. Weston A. Price, who was an amazing man who inspired a lot of my work. And he said in 1934, America needs a brothel on every street corner, and it would solve our tooth decay issue. You know, and the idea that if we have a nourishing broth made from the things that we currently waste, it would just nourish us so much more than the food that we currently eat. So we set up a little van and drove around some of my favorite restaurants like Attica. Ben was on board, Neil Perry, who's a good friend of mine. And so we basically ran this restaurant off the waste of those restaurants and created like a system where they're offcuts and bones and a lot of the trimmings. Like Ben was doing this marron dish, so he was only using the tail. So we had like 300 of the most amazing marron that we were making this broth out of, and we had Chinese doctors sending their patients to us to have a bowl of this broth. It was so out of all the projects, I'm probably most proud of that one because we used waste to make food. And then just had a sabbatical and focused on the idea of which was meant to be in 2016, the idea that our architecture could sustain us, our buildings can save us, and that was Future Food System. That took a long time to get off the ground, and that was 2020. We started 3 days before lockdown. So we built this building in Federation Square that inspired by the Indigenous people of Australia that had, according to Western Price, achieved the best diet in the world. And so we had hundreds of different foods and had Matt Stone and Joe Barrett living in this house. Adam from Rough Rice spent 6 weeks living in the house, and just had the best talent, and it was really cool. That's my last project, and now I've ended up here, and through Adam as well, who's doing a lot of work with you guys, just said you would really love it, come over, and so here we are.
Wow.
So that's my life in...
What an amazing story. And you know what? You make it sound so easy. And, knowing what we know, trying to do a similar thing, it's definitely not. And so what I can get from that in a nutshell is you've grown up in nature. You've sort of been inspired by nature's holistic systems, the genetic ecosystem of nature, DIY approach, do it yourself, artistic slant, make it tasteful, make people want it, because it looks great. And it's also good for the planet. So it sounds really easy, but it's definitely, there's challenges. I mean, what have been your biggest challenges, would you say, in terms of like going zero waste or creating the restaurant, or any of the project? Has there been any like real pain points where you thought this is really hard to find a solution for, and then you found the solution? Is there any particular?
I mean, it's always like Doug calls it the path of most resistance. It's when you're going against how everybody operates and behaves, it is the most difficult way to move forward. But I don't care. Like, it's like, I'm not going to just accept the status quo. But I also learnt from my dad. My dad was not great at English. He was 50 when he migrated to Australia, and worked on a huge flower bulb farm. And the Dutch were not very popular there, because they told everyone what to do. No one knew what they were doing according to these Dutch, specialists that had come over and might hit. And you could see, Dad said, I can see, here comes another one who's going to tell us some bark orders. And so Dad just said to his boss, I just want to work on my own. He set up a new, they were growing liliums. My dad was one of the first in the Netherlands to grow liliums. And so that's how they hired him. So at the age of 50, he migrated with his family to another country and had older brothers and sister. And when he left after 5 years, they were also they loved him, but he never ever once told anyone what to do. He just led by example. He just did his thing, and then people would go, "Oh, look at the way that he's digging or planting, or the way," and he just realized, like, if they're practical people, they'll make those changes and decide for themselves. Tell somebody what to do, it's never going to work. And I've taken that approach, that just build it. Just do it, just make it. Like that idea of, like social media threads are just full of, this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you need to do. It's like, well, just do it. Just show it. Be positive about it. Be humble. And that is, I think, the only way that really we're going to affect change. And that's been my approach. I remember getting a phone call from Doug. So I was going to do greenhouse in London, so I went there quite a bit, and the University of Brighton wanted me to do like a really large project on the roof that they had there. We were going to do an urban farm back in 2012, I think it was. And I decided, young kids, no, I'm not going to spend my kids' young lives on a plane going back and forth everywhere. So I pulled the pin on that, and Doug sort of resurrected that relationship, and that's how he got Silo to happen in Brighton. But I remember every Thursday morning, I drive into the city at like 4 a.m. and I do my flowers and installation, and we'd have like a 1 hour phone call. And he was in tears. And I didn't know it was going to be this fucking hard. He was just bawling. He goes, it's like everything is a battle, everything. And he said, it just seemed like it was so much easier in Australia. And I said to him, well, I hid you from all of the bullshit. Like, I just felt that you doing the menu and trying to do the food zero waste was hard enough. I didn't want to, and of course he was now doing the whole venue, trying to do the whole, from the materials through to, everything. It's hard to imagine, and because you've been there, you've done it, right? So I feel that there is, and a lot of it is about time and money and about effort, so it's really difficult in a Western country to go, like the whole dairy thing took me 4 years to do, a milk system on tap. Like, we use 8 million milk bottles a day in Australia. Most of them are used in cafes and restaurants. That's not like in the household. It's, why are we filling a plastic bottle with an animal fat that then makes that plastic impossible to recover and turn back into the same material? It's the only thing we can use it for is like road, because it stinks and it's polluted and contaminated and uses so much energy to wash out. And now, fast forward 10 years, and McDonald's has the same system that we were the first to use, and saving millions of milk bottles every day. There's just no reason really. It just goes against logic, a lot of this stuff. So yeah, in answer, it's just really hard, but I think you need to have good people around you and who believe in you.
Yeah, no, it's really inspiring. And as you mentioned, the material side as well as the food side, how do you connect those worlds? Because when you walk in a silo, it's at the mycelium tables and everything's very well considered. And I know when we were doing a lot of research here for eGen, which is our first zero waste restaurant, silo kept popping up, and it was like, okay, you've done the recycled plastic plates, and they've worked on this like closed loop system here, and they're growing mycelium and a bunch of different things. And how did that connection come about? Like, when you're doing the menu, was that all considered in terms of like what people will be sitting on?
Absolutely,
the connection
yeah.
between food, material. Obviously, I say waste. There's no such thing as waste, but yeah, how did that come about? The kind of material aspect of what you do.
Well, I mean, I wasn't really aware of how difficult we make it to recycle stuff until I started in the 90s, and in the end, I became quite well known for my work. So I was like trying to source more waste. So I was just ending up in recycling yards, and ending up in these people that recycle material. I started to realize, oh my God, like, if we just modified like the material on the outside of an electrical cable, it would mean that plastic could go back. But because we, it's PVC, or we add a chemical, or we mix all that. It just made me aware of how complex and how difficult we make it to recycle the stuff, and we don't need to, right? And so that deep understanding of the end is critical to those projects succeeding, because people would question me, and I could just knock them straight back down and say, well, this is what's happening. I go, oh, yeah, because a lot of consultants, a lot of these specialists, especially in council and regulators, they will put something up, and it's like, if you really know your stuff, then you've got to have that deep knowledge to be able to fight those battles and get them over the line, so, but ultimately it's all about culture. And for us to change to a zero waste system, we need it to be cool. We need it to be desirable. We need the next generation to go. I mean, every younger generation goes against what the older generation has done, or, whether it's music, or I think in this instance, it'll be the lack of thinking about the holistic system, and I think that it's going to be the end of us if we don't zero waste. If we don't embrace zero waste, humanity is finished, in my opinion. And that's because we've got this linear system where we extract and take out, and then the waste is kind of put in a big pile somewhere, or burned, and we already knew 100 years ago that our food wasn't nourishing us. So this idea that, jaws were narrowing in the early 1900s, and tooth decay, 1 in 2 teeth in America were affected with a tooth cavity. And at the same time, pictures, black and white images were coming back from National Geographic of the Balinese, or the, indigenous groups in Australia, or the Eskimos in Alaska, or really wide jaws, perfect teeth. And so Weston Price in 1924 convinced the American Dental Association to fund a research trip and go to places where the food hadn't changed for at least 1,000 years. And he did that in 24, 25. They got so much information from this, and they went all over the world. I mean, you couldn't do that today because there's virtually no place left that's untouched by Western civilization, right? Or Western food. And in 1934, he wrote, "America is overfed and undernourished." And, you know, the Eskimos in Alaska had 1 in 200 teeth affected. The Hadza in Africa had 1 in 250 teeth. America, 1 in 2, you know, so... But he found an indigenous group living outside of Byron Bay in Australia that he could not believe it. He could not find one tooth cavity in over 300 people. Even elders in their 80s, he thought they were in their 80s, he could not find tooth decay or tooth cavity. And so he became obsessed with what they were doing and analyzed their diet. What they were doing is they were burning the food to ash and then taking it back to the lab and analyzing it. He found that they had 17 times more magnesium and 15 times more calcium in their daily diet. I mean, as well as all the other micro and macro minerals. So the complexity through a diversity of food they ate seasonally. And that was really the inspiration for Future Food System. I thought, if I can recreate that incredible diet, he said, this population has achieved the best diet on earth, complete immunity to tooth decay. And I thought, if we can recreate that diet in a really modern context, and that's Future Food System, it really mimics all that information that was collected back then. And so that's what I mean by that, you know, from a material perspective as well, I think we will solve that problem. Ultimately, I don't think that that's a problem that can't be solved. But I think if we don't return our waste back into our food system, we're fucked.
It's fascinating. And on the subject of the teeth, because I also read somewhere that with a lot of us now don't have straight teeth, and that's a very modern problem. And a lot of it is to do with we're eating very soft food now, so we're not eating like really hard foods like what we were back then, and that's what's causing a lot of that. And also that we're not breathing through our nose as we used to back in the olden days, and that's also contributing to the way that we're shaping our mouths. And
absolutely,
it's fascinating. And as you mentioned, we think we're eating healthy by eating vegetables or whatever, but there's no nutrition in the soil. It's been sprayed with chemicals. You just can't escape it in the modern world, really, if you're living in the city. Or it's scary.
Well, it's
really.
Become airborne now.
It's
you know, the rain that's falling in the United States has got glyphosate in it. So you could be doing everything you can to farm organically, then it's just falling as rain. You know, it's this airborne antibiotic that's an antibiotic that's killing, and it's water-based, water-soluble. So it's like killing what we've coexisted with forever. You know, it's this insane system. But there's an awareness now. Like, I've known about that for a long time, and I feel that now it's become, you know, it's amazing to see. And that the whole, you know, that pandemic of mental illness, I believe, is a direct result of lack of minerals. You know, so selenium is a really critical mineral that, if we think about it, and again, going back to, I'm really interested in that period of time from 1890 to 1930. That was a really amazing time for analyzing and research, which wasn't really clouded by the pharmaceutical industry as we know it today. Didn't even really exist. It kind of formed at that time. So some of the holistic doctors that existed and some of the research that was done and the science is incredible, right? So, but like, they identified prisoners in the US had 30% lower levels of selenium. And so that study showed that if we increase selenium, then we can be happier. We can, there's less violence. We can communicate better. Is anyone talking about that today? No. It's like we're critically starved of, you know, critical minerals, and that's causing this dysfunction and this unhappiness. But no one really thinks that way. It's like, how can that be? It's like, well, we've known that forever, but now suddenly in this modern world, I know it's not that, or, you know, yeah. And
wow. I've never personally even heard of that. The fact that the soil is so, like, there's zero nutrition there anymore, and it's actually causing a mental health issue. I mean, if you ask that to a doctor, they'd probably look at you puzzled. You know, in today's world. That's fascinating insight, that.
Yeah, and it's like Dan Barber, who's a friend of mine in America, has got an amazing restaurant called Blue Hill at Stone Barns. He famously says a slice of bread 100 years ago was equivalent to eating a loaf of bread today. You know, because the soil is a bank account. You know, it doesn't just magically replenish its nutrients. And this idea, Alex Podolinsky, who I became friends with, who was really the founder of biodynamics in Australia, I became quite close with him in his later life. This is the one thing that we didn't agree on. He believed that if you get the biology right and, you know, everything is in tuned, then you can keep pulling food from soil without replacing anything. And it's like, that to me is insane, because if you grow cabbages, let's say, and you look at that land the following year, the grass is like, you know, corrugated iron. Because it's just, the reason why kale and cabbages are so good for you is because they just draw so much from the soil, you know. So we need to return what we take. And it's such a simple solution, because these things are also like human waste is one of the world's biggest issues. Well, I'm designing a house for Zac Efron at the moment. It's like in the most incredible place up in near Mount Warning. Beautiful, like fireflies and endangered butterflies, and it's just like an oasis, and we don't want to have any impact. There's no concrete going into this building. It's a very soft touch, but you know, I can't put a septic system there, and so we're using this energy to basically burn the waste rather than mixing it with water and making it even more problematic to deal with. And then that waste, he's pushing me to go that whole, to realize this dream of a whole holistic system, where that human waste then becomes a safe fertilizer to go back onto the food that we're growing again. And
yeah,
you know,
that's really fascinating. Have you heard of a book called The Architecture of Closed Walls?
No.
And it's all about closed loop systems. So it goes all the way back to like early architecture, like submarines, spacecrafts, things that have to be self-sufficient. And it talks about the power of shit and all these sorts of things. It's really fascinating. I'll drop you that in.
I would love
and
that.
It goes through, you know, everything from Buckminster Fuller to really early stuff in the 1800s, and you know, submarines and a bunch of things. And it's all about the closed loop system. And it puts a lot of emphasis. They call it the power of shit, I think they call it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's fascinating the amount it's a really good thing to utilize in the right way, you know. But again, nobody's thinking about that really.
Well, I mean, China's been farming the same soils for 4,000 years in some places, and they've got a culture of returning this back, you know. And that's, the West should look at what they've done. They've got this knowledge. They've got this incredible history of repeating. I mean, there's even the Dutch, you know, that where I grew up, it's 4 meters below sea level. That was drained in the 1600s. The most fertile soil that they, you know, found, and it grew these incredible crops. But even ultimately then, that soil was drained and they had to return nutrients back to that soil. I mean, what's the reason why we're not talking about this and why it's not on the front page of the New York Times is because of a guy called Fritz Haber, who invented the Haber-Bosch process. He shared the Nobel Prize with Bosch in 1918, working out how to get nitrogen out of gas. And so up until that point in time, the world's population wasn't even 2 billion yet. It was like 1.6 billion. And so I believe that invention is the reason why there's 8 billion of us today, because up until that point in time, how do you bring fertility back to soil in a sustainable way? You know, you couldn't harvest rice without synthetic fertilizer. You have to do it like it was a 5-year cycle. You have to, you know, other plants, animal agriculture to bring nutrients back, rest the soil, that sort of stuff. And we did that in Europe as well. Suddenly, you can just grow rice year after year. And that created all these other problems, started the Green Revolution. Suddenly we had so much grain. Like if I would say to my great-grandfather, are we feeding grain to animals? I go, you what? Like a grain was so precious and so difficult to get and so hungry for the soil that it was just for human consumption. And then by 1945, 1950, we had too much grain. So what did I do? Start feeding it to animals. And now we feed enough grain to animals for, you know, to feed 10 billion people on top of what we already eat, you know. So this insane system. So now you've got animals are malnourished, you've got humans malnourished, you've got this system that's kind of, because, you know, what that process did is it extracted nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. And nitrogen is the most critical one. So plants grew like crazy. So farmers are like, oh my God, this is a game changer. To get that kind of growth was like, you would only get if you got rid of a rainforest and plant, that would be your first crop, you know, in that virgin soil. Here they were getting that year after year. What they didn't realize was that it didn't contain manganese, iron, all the selenium, all these other trace critical elements that we actually need to thrive. And suddenly our health went down. I really believe that the reason why tooth decay was so rampant in the early 1900s in America was because of electricity. They weren't burning fires anymore for cooking and heating the house, and oil came. Suddenly there was no ash to go back onto the backyard veggie patch, which is, the ash was so critical for bringing fertility back as well. It contained everything, you know. So yeah, we've got a lot, but once you know this, I find it incredibly exciting as a designer to just go, fuck, how can we solve this, you know, and make it really cool.
Well, absolutely. And on that subject of making it cool, like obviously you've already done that with restaurants, homes, or as you call them, ecosystems, the way you're holistically doing experiences. And it's sort of what we're trying to do here, right? Where, you know, we're in a music studio, where, you know, we're working with creatives, and we're trying to make this movement more than just in the design world or in the kind of, you know, the kind of more intellectual world where people are just experimenting, but we want to try and get this out to the masses and make it culturally relevant.
Yeah.
And yesterday you were showing me a shoe that you were working on with Kanye West, which sounded fascinating.
Yeah.
Bill, can you explain the process behind that?
Well, I mean, rubber, again, if you look at rubber, you know, it comes from the rubber tree, and it's a really interesting history because Malaysia, I think Japan got control of Malaysia during World War II. And most of the rubber came from Malaysia, so suddenly America and Europe couldn't access rubber, and Russia couldn't access rubber. It was pretty much coming from you know, just a couple of countries. So what do we do? So Russia discovered that there was this dandelion that, you know, it has these massive roots, and within 2 years they completely replaced their rubber production by a crop dandelion. And so I'm fascinated with that, because what I love about, if you go and see like an old car park that's not being used, or a building that's half demolished, what do you see first? Like dandelions are basically breaking the concrete into bits, and you know, it's the ultimate restoration plant. It's like, it's the pioneer. It's the one that gets things going again, you know, from a nature perspective. And it's also happens to be an amazing cancer, you know, for fighting cancer and other things. But yeah, I've got lots of flowering plants. My whole place is designed for butterflies and bees and nature to thrive. But still, dandelions are by far the most popular. You know, you see all this stuff flowering, but the bees will go and the butterflies will go to dandelions first. So they must exude some serious power, right? So I just love the idea that farmers could be planting this green crop that can then provide the world with rubber and so many other benefits, and the yield is equal to rubber from the rubber tree. So the problem with the rubber tree is you're wiping out, you know, the beautiful diverse rainforest. It's in a critical areas like around here, to plant a rubber tree that's genetically identical. It's a monocrop, and they're often sprayed a lot to keep all the other foliage down so that the trees produce lots of rubber. And, you know, because they're genetically identical, they're prone to, you know, get a disease, which some of them already are. So we could wipe out that species just because they're all genetically identical without, you know, basically repeating the potato famine of Ireland. And here's a solution, you know. So agricultural soils desperately need to be restored. Dandelions is, for me, like a game changer. It doesn't need to be sprayed. It provides nectar for, you know, bees and habitat for bees, and could do rubber. And then the other crop is, of course, hemp. So I was trying to convince Ye to use hemp as the fiber for the outside. So you'd have then another restorative plant. We've just harvested 1,000 hectares in Australia. And I think the total yield was 16,500 tons from that, you know. So I'm all about like replacing trees in joinery and MDF and things like that. And hemp is like so perfect. But when we dug this big hole, we found roots had gone, in that 100 days, it had grown to 7 meters, and roots had gone down 2 meters. And, you know, an acre of hemp sequesters the same amount of carbon in 100 days as an acre of forest does in 27 years. So, you know, they're just massively carbon absorbing plants. And it's like when you're working with it, you can tell because it's so carbon dense, it actually, you know, sparks. And, you know, the guys that are working with it are going, there's got to be steel in this. No, it's the material, you know. So we could be making I-beams, structural beams, flooring, you know. I get so excited by all this. Like at the moment, we're making my mum's kitchen out of hemp, you know. No formaldehyde. So when the guys are working with it, they're not getting, you know, these off-gassing. And then when it's in my mum's house, it's not going to be off-gassing. And yeah, there's so many solutions out there, and they're all nature-based.
It's incredible. In my mind, hemp was always like a soft material. I don't know why. I just had a perception of it being like a soft kind of I had no idea it was kind of stronger than steel. That's insane to think.
Yeah, well, the fibers, it's the world's strongest plant-based fiber, and the fiber's on the outside, and then the inside's what's called the hurd, and that's what I believe can replace wood for pulp for, MDF, but also paper, cardboard. And, it's the perfect rotation crop. So in Australia, the crop that was harvested, it left the field completely clean, didn't need to be sprayed, no chemical inputs at all, not a high water demand either. And then because it grows so tall, no UV light gets to the forest, it gets to the floor. And so there's no weeds. Even, some of that land that was growing had super weeds, these weeds that are resistant to glyphosate, and they can't get rid of them. They're like, I saw some of them like trees, but there was none of those either. So they were like, oh my God, this crop could actually give us an opportunity to get rid of those. And so one of the farmers is directly planting wheat. So there's no tilling of the soil. He's direct drilling straight into clean ground. So there's no competition from weeds. And I think it's going to be a game changer for agriculture globally. And you've got all of this mass, like this carbon in the soil, which is crazy, So, yeah.
Wow.
There's so much we don't know about now, and there's so many solutions out there. And, it's really exciting to work on this stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating, I guess, because what I'm seeing now is the awareness is getting there, and I think every brand is looking at it now, but they're scared to look like they're greenwashing or whatever. But I feel like everybody does want a solution, but I just don't feel like the work you're doing. It almost feels like it's like, how do we get that to a position where it can actually change things and brands can go, great, there's an alternative, dandelion rubber,
Yeah.
Like where do you think, like, how close do you think we are to getting to that stage where it becomes a viable alternative, where we can actually, swap out for the rubber we're using today on a larger scale?
Well, my dad used to say it's all about timing, right? So I think my zero waste restaurants were probably, the timing was wrong. I don't think the population was ready to be, Neil Perry always says you're 10 years too early usually with your ideas. But I think with hemp, its time has come, because we've got this situation where Indonesia is clamping down on illegal logging. Brazil has reduced illegal logging by 65% just in 1 year. And there's been a deal done. So Brazil's got the 7 countries that have access to the Amazon or that have Amazonian rainforests on their land to all agree to stop the clearing. You have no idea how disruptive that's been to industries that rely on that illegal timber. This is why I'm so anti-FSC, so Forest Stewardship Council. With Future Food System, there was no FSC. People were going, isn't FSC good? Like this, if it's FSC certified, it's good, right? Forest Stewardship Council. And I've seen with my own eyes how they have a name called FSC Select. And the Select is so small on the bottom. It means that they don't know where that timber's come from. But the company that has selling it does a little bit of sustainable timber as well. And that has given license to basically a football field being cleared every second in the last 2019 was the worst. And so we're now at this critical time where most people know we can't keep going like this. Governments have decided we've got to save what's left, but we need an alternative. You can't just tell people to stop. No, we can't have kitchens anymore. We can't have joinery in our bathrooms anymore. We can't use plywood anymore or whatever. We need an alternative. And I think that's why, from a hemp perspective, the time is right. And we had someone fly over from the United Nations last week who spent a few days with us, and he said there's no one in the world that's doing what you guys are doing, and it could be a blueprint to completely change that. And the rubber's the same. Like Continental is now making tires for bicycles, Grand Prix tires. Not only did they realize that the latex that comes from the dandelion is like the rubber from the rubber tree, it's actually superior. So it's cleaner rubber. And now Europe can, use this green crop that restores soil to make tires, which is crazy.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. I mean, I could talk to you for days, but I think we're probably going to have to wrap up here at Headstream.
Thanks so much. Well,
yeah, man. But you're giving us, you're inspiring us. You're giving us hope, and you're making it exciting. It looks cool, and hopefully we can do some great work together in the future.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Like, my mind is just brimming with ideas. So I think you guys have created something really special here, and I think it can amplify. If you can amplify these ideas to the world, and that's one thing I've noticed by staying here. It is like the United Nations. I've met so many people from so many different countries, and you know, what a legacy for Potato Head to be a catalyst for change, you know, across the world. And it's because it's cool, because of people like you that have made it, you know, that aesthetic. People desire that aesthetic, and you know, we're holding the marble of the future, right? Isn't that, you know, it's pretty much that way. If people desire it, then we can eliminate these problems really quickly.
Absolutely. We've got DJ Harvey sitting next door who's building a motorbike, and he's looking for an alternative to fuel. And you just told me about the project you were doing. Was it Melbourne, the ethanol?
Yeah.
So I was like, you guys have got to meet. And I think that's what the power of what we're trying to do here is, kind of putting different people together that wouldn't normally maybe meet, from different backgrounds, different walks of life, to come up with kind of cool solutions that look great. And as you say, you don't.
I'm going to blow your mind here. So 1 kilo of rice straw produces 250 mil of ethanol. Barley burns 150,000 tons of rice straw a year. So you could not only be powering all of your vehicles and all of your motorbikes here just with the waste that you're currently burning, but you could be exporting green ethanol to, you know, Java, Sumatra. This is the kind of thinking that we need to completely turn this stuff on its head. And it's, imagine the amount of local jobs, and you know, you won't have the smoke in the air from the burning of the straw. You know, that's the kind of thinking we need to solve the world's problems.
Yeah, let's get our own eco gas stations going. That'll be a good one, good project.
Thanks, man.
Amazing, man. Thank you so much, man.
I appreciate it.
Very inspiring. Yeah, keep making change. Thank you.